Hi guys, today I'll be speaking with Caitlin Robb, who has just graduated from Gray's School of Art. She done contemporary art for 4 years and is originally from the northeast of Fife. So we'll be speaking about her exhibition work and other projects lined up for her in the future. What would be your biggest inspiration to your work?
So I think in general, the biggest inspiration for my work is the natural world, and because I've just always been surrounded by nature growing up and such. So I think that's always been a huge part of who I am, but also myself as as an artist. But for the recent work I've been doing, it's been death. So that's a very big topic. Because of their Western culture, there's such a taboo around death
Hmm.
and fear. So I kind of wanted to challenge that a little bit with my practice. But also, I'm a vegan. I've been vegan for about 6 years.
Hmm.
And I wanted to talk about respecting other animals in life and in death. So considering them kind of the same as you would a human, or you should treat humans, because not everyone's great at treating other humans well, but the concepts there. Yeah. But also I've been really inspired by like death rituals of different places, and also Scottish history. That's really founded my research of my practice and has really helped it grow from just me talking about my experience. It's allowed it to be more and kind of a bit spiritual as well.
So you were saying a lot of your inspiration was inspired by your research of Scottish rituals and in other cultures as well. What would be your favourite ritual you've read about?
So that's really hard because they're all fascinating for different reasons. I think the my favorite one for the Scottish culture was there was in the Neolithic era, so quite a long time ago. Um, there was a ritual called excarnation or defleshing, and it kind of is how it sounds. So, the second name of it, um, it's basically the body is left outside, and the birds attack and eat the flesh and make it just bone. It's basically they believed that if the spirit was allowed to stay and the flesh would be what would allow it to stay, it would cause havoc onto the living. So they basically allowed the birds to kind of free the spirit, and then they would take the bones and put them around the house. The bigger ones, they would bury it around the house of the dead, but also keep some of the bones inside the house. So I found it really fascinating that we've gone from that to what we are now, where we have professionals dealing with are dead and like we're not allowed to be near it. Because I also I wrote my dissertation about it as well, and I was talking to death professionals and they were like, nah, I don't think we should be near like our loved ones when they've passed. And I found it
Mhm.
really fascinating that we've jumped from one extreme to another. And it's not been such a big time jump. Like, I mean, the Neolithic era excarnation one, maybe, but the wakes weren't like they were. I think they were like in the 1800s. So it's not that long ago. But there was this divide, and I think religion was a part of it as well and stuff.
Well, when I looked at your exhibition, there was I was at poetry on the walls in some parts. Did you write them, or was did you take it from another poet, or did you write them all by yourself?
So all of these poems were written by myself. So I only got into poetry fairly recently. I always thought that words weren't my thing, that it would art is my way of expression. But I think with poetry, you kind of have to let it come to you. So that's what happened to me, is that suddenly I was starting to write poetry, and you could barely get me to stop. But yeah, no, I took a lot of time and like reflection with these poems, and I think that they're a great part because there's some people, like I was talking to my family, about my artwork, and they wouldn't quite get the message I wanted to say about all the things that we've been talking about. But when they read my poetry, they got it, like they understood. And maybe it's because the particular family members I was talking to really love poetry, and some of them even write poetry themselves.
Mhm.
But yeah, it's interesting how people interpret art differently. And I think poetry allows me to bridge a gap between artists like myself who may be a bit more understanding of seeing it through imagery, and people who um, like to see kind of how you're feeling through words.
Looking at your
So
work as well, I've seen that you use quite a lot of different mediums. What would be your favorite medium to work with?
So that's really hard.
Mhm.
There's kind of a reason for each media that I use. So so it's hard for me to choose a favorite. I'll kind of describe why I do each. So the drawing is always been a foundation of my practice. So that's kind of what got me into wanting to go to art school and wanting to be an artist, was that I would always be drawing, and it's kind of like my way of observing the world. But I also use it to kind of, when I get a new skill, because I've been given them by people or have found them, um, I basically draw them so that I kind of get to know them a little bit. It's kind of on the same idea of there's this artist called Gabriel Orozco, um, and he's a Mexican artist, and he's done a variety of different works. But one piece was Black Kites, and it was a skull, a human skull, a real one, that he drew on for several months. And so in that time, he kind of got to know the skull, and like it's a really beautiful piece. I highly recommend looking at it, because he doesn't do it just kind of put on. He does it in a way that it suits the skull, and it emphasizes how the skull is. It's really stunning, and he does it with pencil. So it's kind of that same idea of like kind of taking time to be one to one with the skull. And so that's why drawing is important for my practice. But then I like to take it further into what I've done for the show. Analog photography allows me to kind of give a bit of sense of like eeriness, but also like analog photography just gives a really nice feel to it. And I've really enjoyed using it to be able to photograph the skulls. Um, yeah, it's great. And then ceramics, I never thought I would be a ceramic artist or a three-dimensional artist, but it's a really interesting way to engage with the audience, especially in person, because the way I have the skulls like poking out of the wall, um, there's a real connection, and there's a lot to play with, which is really interesting.
Did you use any specific techniques? And if so, what was your favorite technique to use?
It's hard to say technique particular. Um, I think that each artist has their own sort of particular style to things. But if you're talking maybe more generally about what, like I've discussed that I do ceramics and I do printmaking and stuff, but I haven't specified which. I would say that one of my favorites for photography is when you're in the darkroom, you can print on a special paper called lith.
Hmm.
Now, when you go into my space, if you go to the left and see the wall on the left, which is full of photographs that I took,
Hmm.
majority of those have, or I think actually maybe all of them have been printed on lith, and they give a kind of sense of age and a particular look to them that kind of is suitable for the rest of my practice, because I kind of primarily choose um, practices that are kind of ritualistic in manner. It just kind of happened, and I kind of really like how it is. It's very hands-on, and it takes a lot of time for me to do my practice. Um, and also, they're kind of the older techniques. So, for example, another technique I like to use is etching, which is a type of printmaking. and it's a fairly traditional type of printing. An example of a great etcher was James McBay. If you go to the Aberdeen Art Gallery when it's suitable,
Hmm.
um, there's a whole room that's full of etching, and he shows his like they show their tools and how a copper plate works and stuff. So I kind of gravitate towards the older processes, and I think that's also kind of another layer of my work is kind of um, like giving processes that are maybe more like closer to dying um like a new sense of life, because we're in a world where you can use your computer, you can um like edit things and you can make 3D models and stuff, whereas I choose things like ceramics and like casting process, which is basically like an older version of 3D modeling, but you're able to do more than just plastic. But the concept is kind of the same of making something three-dimensional, like making a replica of something.
Did you find it difficult to complete your work due to the circumstances of COVID-19 or?
Um, so like of course there was a bit of a challenge because I never worked from home before. I was
Hmm.
always in a studio, I was always surrounded by people, and I was always in the workshops. Like ask any of my classmates, I was like basically like just always in workshops. Because that's a big part of my practice. So it was a real like challenge to adjust from working surrounded by people and with all the workshops to being working by myself and not having all the equipment. But I kind of took it as a challenge because I was graduating anyway this year. I knew that it would be something I would have to go through anyway, like I would have to work on how I'm going to take my photography further without being able to access the darkroom every day. Well, not every day, but
Hmm.
often and easily. Or the printmaking studio, like I mean, honestly, the printmaking I've had to kind of put on hold, sadly. But I've taken the time to work on my drawings more and kind of think about what my next steps are for taking it for printmaking.
Hmm.
Um, and then like ceramics casting, I basically took all my wax casts home. Not my wax casts. I took all the plaster casts home, and I made wax casts, and I made candles, shown in my exhibition as well. Um, so I've kind of taken time to adjust because I've also learned how to process my film in my bathroom, like
Hmm.
because I
Hmm.
just had to make do and kind of figure it out.
Hmm.
Um, so it's been a challenge, but it's been kind of a good challenge to kind of learn how to survive, and also a way of appreciating what I've had at Gray's. Yeah, but of course there's been ups and downs and like procrastination and
Hmm.
whatnot, but I think it's natural. And of course I would have loved to have the last few months at Gray's, um, but in the end it's worked out, and yeah.